Hi, I'm Eleanor. At 68 years old, I've learned that the loudest bullies usually make the most foolish mistakes. So when my arrogant next-door neighbor tried to force me out of my own home, he was completely convinced he had won. The police said their hands were tied, City Hall was useless, and he literally stood on his lawn laughing in my face, assuming an elderly woman was completely out of options. But he made one fatal mistake. He assumed I was going to fight back his way. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't spend a single penny on lawyers. I just made one subtle, perfectly legal change inside my own bedroom, and by the very next morning, he was on his knees, begging for it to stop. Before I show you how one quiet move completely destroyed his upper hand, take a second to subscribe to the channel so you never miss a story. And I'd love to know, where in the world are you watching this from right now? And what time is it on your clock? Let me know in the comments below. I spent 34 years working as an accountant for the city before I finally retired. My reward was a quiet 2-story home on Maple Street in a peaceful suburban neighborhood. For 6 years, my life was blissfully predictable. I spent my mornings tending to my hydrangeas, my afternoons reading on the porch, and my evenings enjoying the silence that settled over our tree-lined street. Most of my neighbors were retirees like me, or young families who respected privacy and kept reasonable hours. It was the kind of community where people looked out for one another without getting in each other's business. Everything changed late last spring when my longtime neighbor, Arthur, sold his house and moved into a senior living facility down in Florida. The house sat vacant for barely 3 weeks before a "sold" sign popped up on the front lawn. I was curious, of course, but I figured whoever bought it would appreciate the quiet neighborhood as much as the rest of us did. I was completely wrong. The new owner was a man in his late 30s named Rick Vance. I first saw him the day his moving trucks arrived. He didn't waste any time making a statement. While most people introduced themselves with a wave or a quick friendly chat, Rick walked around the perimeter of his property with an unreadable expression, barking orders at the movers as if he were commanding a military operation. I walked down my front steps with a warm smile, intending to welcome him to the neighborhood. "Good afternoon," I said, keeping my tone warm and polite. "I'm Eleanor from next door. Welcome to Maple Street." Rick barely glanced at me. He had a Bluetooth earpiece stuck in his ear and held a tablet under his arm. He gave me a quick, cold appraisal that made me feel like an unwelcome trespasser on my own driveway. "I'm Rick," he replied curtly, not offering his hand. "Look, I'm extremely busy managing this crew. We can do the pleasantries another time." "Of course," I said, stepping back immediately. "If you need anything while you settle in, just let me know." "I won't," he said flatly, turning his back on me to shout at a mover who was carrying a sofa. "Watch the door frame. That front door costs more than your monthly paycheck." I walked back inside my house, slightly shaken by his sheer rudeness, but I decided to give him the benefit of the doubt. Moving is stressful, and I assumed he was just overwhelmed with the transition. But over the next fortnight, Rick's presence became a dark cloud over the entire block. He wasn't just aggressive, he was utterly paranoid about security. Within 3 days of moving in, heavy commercial contractors started arriving at his house at 7 in the morning. They installed high privacy fencing right along our shared property line, cutting through mature tree branches without asking for my consent. When I brought it up to him, he simply snapped, "My property line, my trees. I don't compromise when it comes to privacy and protection." Every evening, as I sat in my living room trying to enjoy my tea, I could hear him shouting orders into his phone from his backyard, complaining about potential trespassers, property values, and security threats that simply did not exist in our low-crime neighborhood. Rick made it crystal clear that he viewed everyone around him not as neighbors, but as potential threats to his kingdom. What bothered me most was his growing obsession with securing every inch of his yard. He spent hours pacing his lawn with property maps, measuring distances and glaring at my house as if my windows were spying on him. My quiet retirement had vanished overnight, replaced by an unsettling tension that made me dread stepping out onto my own front porch. I didn't know it yet, but Rick was just getting started, and my peaceful sanctuary was about to be put under direct siege. The week after the fence went up, the real nightmare began. A commercial security company truck pulled into Rick's driveway early on a Tuesday morning. 2 technicians unloaded massive metal brackets, thick industrial wiring, and several heavy boxes marked with commercial security logos. I stood by my kitchen window, watching as they mounted high-powered fixtures along the side of Rick's house facing my property. These weren't standard residential motion lights that you buy at a local hardware store. They were heavy-duty, commercial-grade LED floodlights, the kind used to illuminate parking lots or construction sites at night. What chilled me was where the technicians were mounting the largest fixture and a high-definition dome camera. They placed them on the highest corner of Rick's roofline, angled at a sharp 45 degrees. That angle pointed the light fixture and the camera lens directly across our narrow side yard and straight into my second-floor master bedroom window. I walked outside and approached the head technician near the driveway. "Excuse me," I said, pointing up at the roof. "Are those lights aimed at my bedroom?" Before the technician could answer, Rick stepped out of his garage holding a mug of coffee. He waved the technician back to work and stepped toward me with a smug look. "Is there a problem, Eleanor?" he asked, taking a slow sip. "Rick, that fixture is pointing directly into my bedroom window," I said firmly. "So is that camera. You're aiming high-intensity equipment directly at my private living space." Rick didn't even blink. "I'm installing a top-tier security array to protect my investment. The camera tracks motion along my property line, and the lights are calibrated to blind any potential intruder." "I'm not an intruder," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "I'm your neighbor. Your lights don't need to cross my property line to protect your house. Please adjust the angle down toward your own yard." "The angle covers my side perimeter," Rick said coolly, crossing his arms. "I'm not changing the coverage zone for my system. Security isn't open for negotiation." That evening, I got a taste of what he meant by top tier. At dusk, the automatic sensor triggered. A blinding beam of cold, harsh light burst through my bedroom window, illuminating every single corner of the room. It was like living inside a surgical operating theater or under stadium floodlights. The floodlights delivered over 10,000 lumens of pure white light. Even with my standard blinds fully drawn, the illumination cut through the fabric, casting harsh, exaggerated shadows across my ceiling. My quiet, dark sanctuary was completely obliterated. I tried putting up heavy blackout curtains the next day, spending over $200 at the store. But the intensity of Rick's lights leaked through the edges, creating a glaring halo around the entire window frame. Worse yet, every time a stray breeze blew a tree branch or a small animal crossed the lawn, the motion sensors tripped, blasting the light on and off in random, disorienting intervals. Sleep became virtually impossible. I spent the next 4 nights tossing and turning, waking up with pounding headaches and bloodshot eyes. My heart rate stayed elevated, and the physical exhaustion began affecting my daily routine. I couldn't focus on my reading, my hands trembled while gardening, and my peaceful retirement turned into a constant state of high alert. From my window, I could see Rick sitting in his living room, completely untroubled by his own lights, because they were facing outward, away from his windows, and straight into mine. He knew exactly what he was doing. He was using security as a weapon to assert dominance over the neighborhood, expecting an elderly woman to simply fold under the pressure. He thought my age made me weak and helpless. He was about to learn just how wrong he was. By Friday afternoon, after 4 consecutive nights without decent sleep, I decided to make one final attempt at a peaceful resolution. My mother always taught me that a neighborly approach often yields better results than immediate conflict. I wasn't looking for a fight. I wanted a workable compromise. I baked a warm dish of my signature peach cobbler, placed it in a glass dish, and walked across the lawn to Rick's front door. I rang the doorbell and waited. Through the narrow side glass panel, I saw him walking down the hallway, glancing at his watch with visible annoyance. When he opened the door, he didn't invite me inside or even acknowledge the dish in my hands. He stood in the doorway, blocking the entrance with a cold, impatient expression. "Eleanor," he said, skipping any greeting, "I'm in the middle of a conference call. What is this about?" I held my ground, keeping my tone calm, measured, and polite. "I brought you some fresh peach cobbler to welcome you properly, Rick, but I also came to talk about the lighting situation. I haven't slept properly in 4 days because those 10,000 lumen floodlights shine directly into my master bedroom all night." Rick looked down at the dish, then back up at my eyes. A faint, condescending smirk touched the corners of his mouth. "I thought we already discussed this. The lights are part of my perimeter defense system." "I understand wanting to secure your home," I said, holding his gaze. "However, you can achieve full coverage of your yard by adjusting the light angles down by just 15 degrees. That would keep the light on your property and out of my face. As for the camera, angling it down keeps your perimeter secure without recording straight into my second-story windows." Rick let out a sharp, dismissive scoff, resting one hand against the doorframe. "Let me be clear about something, Eleanor. I paid top dollar for this system, and it functions exactly the way I programmed it. I didn't buy a house in this neighborhood to let my elderly neighbors dictate how I protect my personal property." "It isn't about dictating, Rick," I replied, my voice dropping an octave as my resolve hardened. "It's about basic decency and respect between neighbors. You're trespassing on my privacy and interfering with my basic living conditions." Rick stepped forward, narrowing his eyes as he tried to intimidate me. "This is my property, and it's my absolute right to maintain maximum security around it. If you don't like it, close your curtains tight and deal with it." He didn't give me a chance to respond. He reached out, grabbed the glass dish of peach cobbler, set it unceremoniously on the small patio table next to the front door, and looked me dead in the eye. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have important work to do," he said curtly. Before I could utter another word, he shut the heavy front door right in my face. The sharp click of the lock turning signaled the end of any neighborly diplomacy. I stood on his porch for a brief moment, breathing slowly. I didn't feel hurt or tearful. Instead, a cold, sharp clarity settled over me. I had given Rick every opportunity to act like a civilized adult and handled a matter reasonably. He had mistaken my polite demeanor for weakness and my age for powerlessness. He believed he could bully me into submission because he held the upper hand in technology and arrogance. Walking back across the lawn toward my house, I left the cobbler sitting on his table. Diplomacy was officially off the table. Rick wanted a battle of wills on Maple Street, and he was about to learn that 34 years of bureaucratic experience and patience always outmatches loud arrogance. On Monday morning, I started working through official channels. As a former city municipal employee, I knew how local regulations worked, and I expected authorities to enforce basic nuisance laws. My first call was to the County Code Enforcement Office to file a formal complaint regarding severe light pollution and privacy invasion. The officer on the phone was polite but utterly unhelpful. "Ma'am, light trespass complaints require an inspector to conduct a site visit with a light meter after dark," he explained. "Currently, our office has a backlog of 6 to 8 weeks before we can dispatch an inspector to your neighborhood zone." 8 weeks of sleepless nights was an impossible timeline. Next, I contacted the board president of our homeowners association. I explained the situation in detail, describing how Rick's commercial floodlights and camera were directed straight into my second-story master bedroom window. The HOA president sighed heavily over the receiver. "Eleanor, I understand your frustration, but our community covenants regarding security fixtures are notoriously vague. We can issue a courtesy warning letter, but any formal violation notice requires a full board review at our quarterly meeting in 2 months." Frustrated by the endless bureaucratic delays, I called the police non-emergency line. Later that afternoon, Patrol Officer Davis pulled up to my driveway. I invited him onto my front porch and pointed up toward Rick's roofline, showing him the angled floodlights and the high-definition camera dome pointed directly into my personal living space. Officer Davis took a few notes on his pad, looking up at the fixtures with a sympathetic nod. "I see what you're dealing with, Miss Eleanor, But legally, unless he physically steps onto your land, this falls under a civil dispute between neighbors. We cannot force him to move a camera or adjust a light unless there's a formal court order or a direct criminal violation. So anyone can blast 10,000 lumens into a neighbor's bedroom and face zero immediate consequences? I asked. Until a judge or code enforcement officer steps in, my hands are tied, Officer Davis admitted gently. My best advice is to hire a civil attorney and file for an injunction. An injunction meant thousands of dollars in legal fees and months of court hearings. That evening, as Officer Davis drove away, Rick was standing at the end of his driveway, leaning against his mailbox with a smug grin. He had watched the entire interaction with the police officer from his front porch. He walked over to the edge of his lawn, calling out to me in a loud, mocking tone. "Calling the cops on me, Eleanor? Really? Did they tell you the same thing I did? It's my property, and I run it how I want." I stood my ground near my porch steps, meeting his eyes without flinching. "The system moves slowly, Rick. That doesn't mean you're in the right." Rick laughed loudly, taking a few steps closer with an arrogant posture. "Keep crying to the city, old lady. By the time they send an inspector out here, summer will be completely over. You're completely out of options." That night, to prove his dominance, Rick turned the floodlights on early and left them running continuously. The blinding glare cut through my curtains again, flooding my home with unwanted light. Sitting at my dining room table, listening to the hum of his security system, a sense of absolute clarity washed over me. Relying on slow city bureaucracy and helpless law enforcement was a dead end. Rick believed the legal system protected his right to be a tyrant, and he assumed my age meant I was completely powerless. But I had spent 34 years working with rules, spatial measurements, and systems. If the law wouldn't fix this for me, I would use pure physics to solve it myself. The next morning, I woke up at dawn, refreshed by a sudden wave of sharp, calculated focus. The sleepless nights, fruitless complaints, and frustrating phone calls were over. If Rick wanted to use commercial technology to invade my private space, I was going to use simple science and basic geometry to defend it. I opened my notepad, pulled out a digital laser measuring tool from my garage, and went up to my second-floor master bedroom. I carefully measured the distance and angle from Rick's roofline fixture straight to my window pane. The floodlight sat 22 feet away, positioned at a 35-degree downward slope aimed directly into my room. Right beside it sat his high-definition security camera dome. I recalled a fundamental principle from high school physics. The angle of incidence equals the angle of reflection. Light travels in straight lines, and when it strikes a mirror, it reflects off at the exact same angle and arrived. I didn't need to destroy his property or engage in messy conflicts. I didn't need to cut his power lines, trespass on his lawn, or commit any act of vandalism that could give him legal leverage over me. All I needed to do was intercept his light beam at the exact point of entry and bounce his own high-intensity energy directly back to its origin. The strategy was elegant, entirely lawful, and completely contained inside my own home. I logged onto my laptop and researched industrial materials. Standard glass mirrors absorb and scatter light, so I searched for heavy-duty, highly reflective architectural mirror panels, specifically optical-grade acrylic mirrors used in solar and high-intensity lighting systems. They reflected 99% of visible light with zero distortion. I ordered 2 precision-cut 3x4-foot sheets, paying extra for priority local courier delivery. By early afternoon, a delivery van pulled into my driveway. The driver unloaded the heavy flat crates onto my porch. He looked at the thick, mirror-polished panels with a curious expression as I signed his handheld terminal. "That's some heavy-duty reflective glass, ma'am," the driver remarked, handing me my receipt. "You building a dance studio upstairs?" "Not at all," I replied with a calm, confident smile. "I'm just making some necessary adjustments to my bedroom lighting." I carried the panels upstairs to my bedroom. Using a sturdy wooden frame and heavy-duty adjustable mounting brackets, I built a dual-panel stand that sat directly behind my glass window pane on the interior sill. Using a digital angle finder, I carefully calibrated the pitch of the mirrors. I angled the top panel slightly upward to align perfectly with his commercial floodlight housing. I adjusted the bottom panel to target the precise center of his camera lens. I stepped back to inspect the setup. From the outside, anyone looking at my window would see nothing more than sleek interior mirror decorative panels sitting behind my glass. There were no exterior attachments, no property damage, and zero violations of city codes or HOA bylaws. It was a purely passive arrangement inside my private residence. By 5 o'clock, the trap was fully primed. I pulled my curtains back just enough to expose the reflective surfaces directly to Rick's roof fixtures. I went downstairs, poured a fresh cup of tea, and waited for the sun to sink below the horizon. I looked at my watch as dusk settled over the neighborhood, feeling a deep sense of quiet composure. There was no anger left in me, only the calm satisfaction of someone who had done their homework thoroughly. Rick believed his arrogance made him invincible. He was about to discover that physics doesn't take sides. At 8:30, evening fell completely, and the streetlights flickered on along Maple Street. I sat downstairs in my kitchen with a book and a quiet cup of chamomile tea, waiting for the inevitable. Right on schedule at 9 o'clock, a loud metallic click echoed from Rick's roofline as his automated commercial security system engaged. The 10,000 lumen floodlight burst to life with blinding, aggressive intensity, cutting through the twilight. But the moment the raw, harsh beam struck my second-floor window pane, my precision-angled optical mirrors went to work. The underlying physics was completely flawless. Instead of penetrating my bedroom and destroying my evening, 99% of the high-intensity illumination hit the reflective acrylic panels and bounced straight back across the 22-foot gap with devastating accuracy. The results were instantaneous and catastrophic for Rick's high-tech security setup. The bottom reflective panel aimed a concentrated beam directly into the glass lens of his high-definition surveillance camera. The intense white light completely overwhelmed the digital sensor, instantly blinding his system and turning his expensive mobile monitoring feed into a useless screen of solid white noise. Meanwhile, the top mirror directed a massive, piercing beam of light straight back across the property line and directly into Rick's second-story master bedroom window. Because his commercial floodlights were mounted facing outward, away from his house, he had never bothered installing blackout curtains in his own master suite. The redirected light illuminated his bedroom like a high-powered spotlight on an open stage. Within 20 minutes, the sound of slamming doors and angry yelling echoed across the quiet neighborhood. I walked calmly to my front porch, opened the door, and stepped out into the cool night air. Rick was standing on his front lawn in his pajama pants, holding both hands over his eyes to block the blinding glare bouncing off my window. He looked like a man attempting to stare directly into the midday sun. "Helenar!" he roared, pointing a trembling, furious finger toward my second floor. "What the hell are you doing up there? Shut off those damn searchlights right now!" I stood composed on my porch steps, keeping my hands resting comfortably in my sweater pockets. "I don't have any searchlights on, Rick. In fact, if you look at my porch, my exterior lights are completely turned off." "Don't play stupid games with me," he screamed, his voice cracking with utter frustration as he squinted against the piercing reflection. "You're shining a high-powered beam directly into my bedroom window. I can't even see inside my own hallway." "That isn't my light, Rick," I replied, in a calm, firm, and measured voice. "That is your own commercial security system reflecting off my interior window glass. You set it yourself on Friday. It's calibrated to blind any potential intruder along the property line." Rick stood frozen on the grass, his face turning bright red with rage as the full reality of his predicament finally registered. He rushed back inside and tried to adjust his system settings remotely from his smartphone app, but every time a night breeze swayed a tree branch, the motion sensor tripped again, firing another wall of blinding light straight into his own face. He couldn't disarm his security system without leaving his entire property vulnerable, which his deep paranoia refused to allow. Yet leaving it active meant turning his own bedroom into an unbearable, illuminated furnace. He tried taping cardboard over his bedroom windows, but the sheer wattage burned through every gap, casting sharp, blinding shadows across his ceiling. For the first time in weeks, I walked upstairs to my quiet guest room on the opposite side of the house and pulled the covers up. Throughout the night, I could hear Rick stomping through his home, cursing loudly and slamming doors as he tried in vain to escape his own light. He spent the entire night wide awake, trapped inside a nightmare of his own making. I closed my eyes and slept peacefully until morning. I woke up at 7 o'clock the next morning, feeling more rested than I had in weeks. The quiet sanctuary of my home had finally been restored. As I poured my morning coffee in the kitchen, I saw flashing red and blue lights pulling into Rick's driveway. It was Officer Davis, the same patrolman who had visited me earlier in the week. Rick was standing on his front lawn, completely unhinged. He wore the same wrinkled pajama pants from the night before, with dark, heavy bags under his bloodshot eyes. He was gesturing wildly toward my house, his voice carrying clearly across the quiet morning air. "She attacked my property," Rick shouted, pointing aggressively at my second-floor window. "She set up some kind of illegal industrial laser beam system to blind me. I want her arrested for harassment and immediate destruction of my property." I walked out onto my front porch with my coffee mug, keeping my posture calm and relaxed. Officer Davis looked from Rick's frantic, sleep-deprived state to my quiet demeanor, raising a skeptical eyebrow. He motioned for Rick to stay put and walked across the damp grass to meet me. "Good morning, Eleanor," Officer Davis said politely, tipping his hat. "Your neighbor claims you have installed an illegal lighting apparatus aimed directly into his master bedroom. Do you mind if I take a quick look upstairs to clear this entire situation up?" "Not at all, officer," I replied smoothly, stepping aside. "Please, come right in. You know your way around." I led him upstairs and opened the door to my master bedroom. The heavy acrylic mirrors sat silently on their wooden mounts, perfectly aligned behind the closed glass window. Officer Davis stepped up to the window pane, examined the setup closely, and looked across the property line at Rick's massive commercial floodlights and camera array. A slow, knowing smile spread across his face. He pulled out his notepad, jotted down a single line, and turned back to me. "Pure physics," he muttered with an unmistakable tone of deep professional respect. We walked back downstairs and out onto the front lawn, where Rick was pacing furiously, waiting for my arrest. "Well," Rick demanded, crossing his arms and glaring at me, "are you taking her in? Did you confiscate her spotlights?" Officer Davis flipped his notepad shut and looked Rick squarely in the eye. "There are no spotlights inside her house, sir. Eleanor has simply placed some decorative mirrors inside her own private bedroom. She hasn't crossed your property line, and she hasn't violated a single municipal code." Rick's face went pale. "What? That's impossible. She blinded my security system and kept me awake all night." "The blinding light is coming entirely from your own hardware," Officer Davis stated firmly, cutting off any further argument. "As I told Eleanor earlier this week, property owners have the right to manage the interior of their homes as they see fit." She is well within her legal rights to decorate her bedroom with mirrors. If the reflection is causing a disturbance on your property, the legal responsibility falls strictly on you to adjust the original light source. Rick opened his mouth to argue, but the sheer exhaustion caught up with him. He realized he was completely trapped by the very rules he had tried to weaponize against me. His arrogance had finally met an immovable wall. "You have exactly 48 hours to lower the angle of your fixtures," Officer Davis added sharply. "If you continue blasting those lights across the property line, you'll be the one cited for creating a public nuisance." Without another word, Rick turned around and dragged himself back into his house, utterly defeated. By late afternoon, a different crew arrived, silently removing the commercial dome camera and angling the floodlights straight down toward Rick's own grass. I stood on my porch, breathing in the crisp morning air. I didn't have to raise my voice, hire an expensive lawyer, or break a single law. I just played the long game. That evening, I sat in my living room, sipping my tea, as the peaceful, unbroken darkness finally settled over Maple Street once again.